We're coming to the end of Game Devs of Color Expo 2025, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to share this talk, not just because it wraps up so many of the themes that we've covered over the past 3 days, but because it centers on anger. Anger is an emotion that I know I've been trying to figure out how to deal with as it comes up for me more often. I look at the systems that hold back so many of us from being able to simply live our lives, if not thrive in our work. This anger in particular centers for Black women. Our speaker is a Black woman working in AAA who found that, of course, the system was not going to give her the support that she damn well deserved. So she built Coalition, continued to fight for change. She's here to talk about what it's looked like for her, what it means to build around that anger, what it means to have to continue experiencing that anger, and to deal with that internal question that we feel sometimes about how much this fight is worth it. So please welcome to the stage an RPG programmer working on Skate 4, Katrina Barkwell.
Hey, my name is Katrina Barkwell, and I'm a programmer currently working remote in Montreal. A reminder right at the top, all of the opinions shared in this talk are my own. 7 years and two shipped games ago, I was a co-op completing her internship at BioWare. 1 year into my regular full-time employment, I started a workplace solidarity group for marginalized devs in the company. With that group, I was able to create a better culture and sprinkle authentic moments of representation to Dragon Age 4. I want to provide you with a playbook that I use to help you do the same wherever you are. The woman in the photo is my beautiful and brilliant mother, Dr. Diana Barkwell, PhD in nursing. Yeah, why do that? Well, on Bell Hook's second edition of Ain't I a Woman, she includes a photo of her own mother on the cover. After her first women's studies class, she started to see her mom and women like her, all raised in the 50s, in a new light. My mom, like hers, wouldn't describe herself as a feminist, but always stressed the importance of understanding power dynamics, having an education, and never being dependent on a man for money. Progress requires consistent, steady pressure. We take steps towards our goals. Our mothers, who were themselves held captive by the bonds of patriarchy, encouraged us to break free. So, because it's important to me, and I thought it'd be a cute little way to reference bell hooks, my mother is the first photo on this presentation to give her the same honor. Okay, so who are you? I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, but I definitely always looked like the type of kid who was gonna make video games. I attended a very fancy private school for girls, and 2025 is more accurate to say AFAB, and I have no idea what the school is doing now. But a big reason for this is my mother worked hard so her daughter could go to the most prestigious school in the city. Her daughter would never grow up thinking she was stupid and with every opportunity my mom can have for herself. My mom grew up in Barbados and immigrated when she was a teenager. She had a tough childhood. She grew up being told she was stupid and driven by spite, went on to be the most educated person in her family. But it also left her overprotective of me and determined to provide a life for me where I'd never have to suffer the way she had. And I know that's got to be hitting for lots of people in the audience. So we grew up very different. Winnipeg is a small, frigid Canadian city, and it definitely didn't have a games industry when I was growing up. In fact, BioWare was such a cool thing because it was one of the few Canadian studios I actually knew about. For those of you unfamiliar with Winnipeg, I can tell you we do have a park built on a landfill that is affectionately called Garbage Hill. The city tried renaming it Westview Park, and then people kept on vandalizing it with Garbage Hill signs, so they just caved and made it official. Despite our small size, we've been the murder capital of Canada several times, and we are in the top 5 list of coldest cities in the planet. And generally, we're kind of a punchline province, but it's home. It's where I grew up, and I love it. We don't get to see a ton of Black Canadian representation, period, but despite what you might assume about a small Canadian prairies town, it can be diverse. Manitoba has a strong history of resistance and Indigenous culture. My dad was a historian, so I could spend hours telling you about how it's the birthplace of Louis Riel and how Métis culture continues to live and shape Winnipeg today. And it's where my brother and my nephew still live, and my childhood friends. And I knew one day I would have to leave it. When you're from a smaller city, it can sometimes mean less opportunity. For a lot of us, pursuing our dream means leaving behind community. You're launched into predominantly white spaces and sold a narrative of making it. Sometimes this is thrust on you specifically because it justifies the tokenization, but it falsely reinforces the through line that we should abandon our connection to home because you're doing well. Despite humble beginnings, you really belonged here all along. It distorts into your differences were holding you back. Growing up around people that looked like you was holding you back. You deserve this more than them. You get to leave here. And if you listen closer, you can hear this as just a repackaging of one of the good ones, and it's simply not true. So that's why I never shut up about how I'm from Winnipeg, or my parents, or all the context that shaped me. You should know that you don't have to sand those pieces of yourself down, even though there will be immense pressure too. And I understand it's a luxury, and sure, easy for me to say now with two shipped titles under my belt. And I entered the industry looking like this. My proximity to whiteness made it easier for me to get my foot in the door. It was years before I was comfortable enough to look how I do now. But a lesson I got from my dad is you don't get to just not use privilege. It's not enough to be an ally. You must be a co conspirator. Recognizing your privilege then means you can leverage it as much as possible for justice. I felt I couldn't look like this when I started, but I look like this now, so hopefully anyone else coming into the industry doesn't feel the way that I did. So take what's useful and leave what's not. This doesn't mean you have to blindly love where you grew up or your family, but if you do, put into it what it put into you. I haven't lived at home for 8 years now, but I still visit. I keep up with local politics. I donate my money or my time when I can. I run practice interview sessions with my old university co-op program. My whole story in game dev started because of the University of Manitoba. And I still do my best to pull up anyone else I can into the industry, but I'm even more interested in growing a community there. Small cities with more diverse talent deserve the industry's investment into them. And it couldn't happen for me, but I like to imagine what my life could have been like if I didn't have to leave home. And I want that to be an option for other people. It's also why I so strongly support remote work. It increases accessibility and it gives new hires an option about whether they want to move their lives to a new country, province, whatever it is. Companies were thrilled when we were all willing to pivot and shove our whole work lives into our homes. And over 5 years, we proved it was totally possible to make a model like this work. So companies now enforcing return to office to focus on hiring local talent leaves me suspicious, especially when many of the industry hubs are predominantly white, or even worse, when they're not, but the offices still look like that. Remote work wasn't the default in 2018. So when I got my big girl job at BioWare, I went through culture shock moving to Alberta. Edmonton now has a growing population of Black immigrants, but the office and surrounding area I worked out of certainly didn't represent that. When people started asking me, "Where are you from?" I would stupidly say Manitoba because I didn't even understand what they were actually asking me with that question. Getting a computer science degree and then a full-time job in a white cis male dominated industry meant I had become familiar with a baseline level of discomfort. But the racial demographics of my university weren't nearly as abysmal as game development. Luckily, my onboarding material provided me information on ERGs. AAA studios often have employee resource groups, which at first glance seem like the best way to find community at work. At this point in time, the Edmonton office only had a women's group, but the couple times I tried to engage with it, I felt rejected. And this isn't terribly surprising. In 2018, girl boss feminism was in, so instead of real challenges to structural oppression, it was more popular to post inspiring quotes about persistence in cursive. Advice offered by the group left me feeling alienated because things like lean in, don't work for Black and or trans women were already often perceived as aggressive or arrogant. I had developed a sense for this too. I mean, going to an all-girls school from the ages of 6 to 18 proved to me sharing a gender kind of counted for little. My mother was a university professor. Since childhood, reinforcing you are strong and you should have your own job to support yourself was obvious to me and exemplified by my mother. Why wasn't that the type of Black women we were learning about? If you're on it, you realize the problem was the group felt like it was lacking intersectionality. It felt like a group for white women. So I often found myself leaning on the Black Employee Resource Group. And this is also why Angela Davis has always really resonated strongly with me. When she published the book Women, Race, and Class, people started referring to her as a feminist, and her response was, I was writing about Black women, women of color. I'm not a feminist. I'm a revolutionary Black woman. Davis said she had initially associated feminism with middle class women and white women. The reality is, talking about intersections does make establishing gender based solidarity harder, but ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. Worse, when we ignore how these things intersect, we alienate and reject so many brilliant women of color to the cause. Beat, the Black EA team, provided me with a global community that helped me a ton, but I still wished for something local that could address specific issues as a Black woman in Canada. But even if I had wanted to make a local chapter, I didn't have enough Black coworkers to fill all the positions required to even start an employee resource group. The system didn't have a solution for me, so I built my own table. About 1 year into my full time contract, my friend and co conspirator Rachel helped me. She had been advocating for a Pride chapter, but we both didn't have enough numbers to start individual groups. But together, we can make a space with both a woman of color and a trans woman as the leads. It would be something that necessitated allyship and also serve as a platform for other marginalized devs. We even threw in a little neurodiversity for fun. And we grew really slowly, we grew. And most of our first members were equally frustrated allies from the original women's group who still did a lot of good work. It was just those small things that kind of got to me. And we didn't have a formal structure either. We were just a Slack channel at our biggest, 108 members, but we participated in events and ran initiatives within the company and just generally helped out. And we never really wanted to be stagnant, so we'd regularly put out calls to help with our leadership. Some groups require a minimum tenure for you to do this, but I kind of find it more of a barrier than a boon. Additionally, marginalized devs usually churn out faster than the industry standard, which is only 4 years. Plus, it would have been hypocritical of me. Being so junior was an asset the way I saw it. People felt a lot more comfortable telling me things because I had no punitive power over them. In 2020, our events lead organized Gamers for Groceries, which was a Twitch stream supporting Food Banks Canada. We sourced devs from all over the games industry in Edmonton, and over 2 years, we were able to raise 10K for the cause. Indigenous employees joined our group and voiced that we should start on the 94 calls to action for truth and reconciliation. Land acknowledgements are a minimum, but we were more interested in putting money into the community. We raised a bunch for Imaginative's grant that sends an Indigenous dev to GDC, and using our lessons locally, we were able to stand up a group within all of EA globally. Sometimes the criticism of intersectionality is that you water down every cause you support, but for us, that never really felt like the case. The way we functioned was by targeting which house was on fire, or we joked you could always put up the back signal in our channel and we would answer it. At the start of the pandemic, we focused our efforts on amplifying Black and Asian voices. When what was eventually thousands of bodies were found buried in residential schools, we focused on platforming Indigenous members who wanted to tell their stories. When trans lives and bodily autonomy were threatened, we pivoted to researching charities and collecting internal resources to support members, including help with relocation and immigration. And this was personal to us. Rachel moved from Texas in 2019 for this reason. I eventually moved out of Alberta in 2023 because of racism. And eventually we got an executive sponsor who pulled up a seat at the table for us. We could present to leadership and give more accurate representation of how people were feeling at the company. We'd present anonymized feedback and also pitch solutions. It also meant we had time to speak at company-wide town halls, providing us a place to kind of brag about stuff we were doing, but also excite people into joining us and wanting to help out. If you find yourself here, actually at the table, here's what I'd recommend. Look at your company values and be uncompromising on them. Don't half step yourself with ass with no teeth. More often than not, leadership was more afraid to mess up on their way to the right thing. But when we pointed back to our company values, it freed them to make mistakes. Perfect is the enemy of good. This did mean we did sometimes fall into the trap of providing our usefulness through education. But because our internal leadership was diverse, it meant we could tag in and tag out when one person was overwhelmed. I might be exhausted explaining for the fourth time what a microaggression is, but Rachel can take that conversation on racism today. Coming from a white woman, it might even land better. And it also meant we could better manage our social capital. It's not fair, but if you're always the one getting mad about something, people start to tune you out. Spacing out who would speak on what and when meant we could keep consistent pressure without jeopardizing one specific person's career. The diversity also meant depth of the topics we could talk into. We could jump deeper than just like feminism 101. We had the luxury of disagreement because we had the shared goal of equity. And it meant we could tackle issues between communities. So for us, the Black community hasn't been the greatest with 2S LGBTQIA plus members, but in a space that necessitated understanding that oppressed people can also oppress, we can meaningfully address and disable any stereotypes groups had. And that's great. How impressive as a junior to take on such a big undertaking. People like to call this brave, and that's never what it feels like. It's not. It should break your heart. That's tragic. A new hire felt so isolated at her job. She was the first one to do something to make it less hostile. And as noble as this all sounds, to keep it so real with y'all, my snapping point was someone touching my natural hair. And I knew it was because my hair was natural, because I had spent a year wearing it straight until finally I felt established enough to just wear it the way it grew out of my head. James Baldwin said, "To be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time." He was talking about America, but I know that's right for Black women in game development. For me, action started as a moment of dread. And I go through this list. Am I overreacting? Is it worth it? Can I prove it? Can I tolerate it anymore? But eventually I get to, is it happening to anybody else? And the answer is usually yes. So I go through my list again. Can I tolerate it becomes no. I can't. So acting on it never feels brave like people describe. The alternative is just impossible to swallow anymore. So let's work backwards and prove it. Environmental, social, and governance reports. The data shows that these perceived feelings of hostility are substantiated by the International Game Developers Association diversity reports and environmental, social, and governance reports from Blizzard, EA, and Microsoft. You might be wondering, what is an ESG report? Well, E stands for environmental. This is stuff like sustainability. Social means any sort of equity, diversity, inclusion stuff. And governance is who is your board made up of? Who are they? Where are they from? In Canada, these are voluntary, which means good luck looking it up. Companies don't like to make reports talking about this stuff. In the States, it's largely voluntary, except for in California. And in Europe, ESGs are mandatory and they're also expanding the requirements they got to do. But this lack of global standardization gives companies a lot of wiggle room, even down to me knowing what phrase to Google to even find the reports. I'd love to include epic, but the word was so overused in the early 2000s, it's impossible to find. EA's version is named their impact report, and Microsoft splits theirs into 3 separate reports for each category. And to be honest, these are mostly targeting climate change, which is a really good goal. And I could do a whole talk on what companies report and why they report this way and when they do it and when they have to release these reports. But for our purposes, we're just going to look at how Blizzard, EA, and Microsoft disclose their information. Blizzard has reports from 2020, 2021, and 2022. These images are from page 17 of their 2022 report. Now, would I have named this category something else? No, but that's an aside. This bar chart is pretty unglamorous, but they include this highlighted text at the bottom of the page. The part I want you to look at is when you specifically look at women in game development leadership roles, the number has more than quadrupled since 2016. And that's like, wow, quadrupled. Well, if we're looking at 25% now, and then you read the sentence again, and you're like, it's talking about the number of women, not the percentage, which really means to say, as we hired more people, we also hired 4 times more women than we did in 2016, which we also don't have numbers for in this chart. Not very breakable, but okay, what else are they committing to? On page 9 of the report, they have a section outlining their goals. The top one says they want to increase the combined percentage of women and non-binary employees by 50 over 5 years, which sounds like, okay, that's close to the population split, until you realize they said by 50%, not to 50%. So if we take that 25.5 we saw before, divided by 2, and then add that to the existing 25.5, we get 38.25. Okay, so how are we progressing and what rate are we looking at then? Well, if we do the math, we're like, okay, we want 38.25%, and we're already at 26% of everybody. At that rate, it would take about 6 years. And okay, that's not terrible. This was 2022 when this started in 2020. And we're coming up right on 5 years here. So let's see how they're doing. And this is what the website has. That's it. And then you're like, right, they're owned by Microsoft now. So, okay, I can check them. I'm sure that won't muddy the data at all, considering they're a giant tech company and not only a video game giant, but they also make consoles. And based on page 11, the numbers actually go down in 2023, which, to Microsoft's credit, they do call out on the side here. Microsoft also has data on race, a lot of it, which I'd love to compare over time at Blizzard's, but Blizzard only included it in 2022. And it's because they finally hired a chief DEI officer, Kristen Hines, who started doing this work. So if we pick up where we left off and we go back to Microsoft, we can see the presentation of this data, while thorough, is a little hard to follow. The worst offense really being that the presentation of this bar graph, there's an attempt at scale, but we can see any value between 0.2 and 8% use the same size. All right, well, what about EA? Well, they're still doing it for one, so that's pretty all right, since 2020. But the way they present data is also suspicious. Microsoft is guilty of this too. We can see them put a decimal point on a percentage, which is already a very tiny number. But the reason they likely do this is otherwise they wouldn't be able to show the growth, or every time it could be summed up as, what, max 2% per year? They also give you a lot of information. The way these columns are set up is not the most intuitive. Making it one big smushed chart means that your eyes kind of get lost tracking information, and you might accidentally think there's a big jump of improvement when really it's not great. I just went in Photoshop and I added color coding to these columns, and it's immediately way easier to see what's going on. So now if we just look at overall numbers, what if we also just included the totals? And I'd love to be able to see what categories went up and which one went down. So if we look at overall, outside of white male employees, people leaders, not great. Technical roles, also not great. And when we look at the data like this, oh no, it's a lot more obvious what's going on here. So, looking at EA's impact report from 2020 and now, all women went up by 3.4%, Black people went up by 0.8%, and multiracial people like myself went down by 0.5%. At EA's rate of change, it'll take 27 years to reach gender parity in leadership roles. At this point, EA doesn't even do reporting data on non-binary folks. And if you look at this and you're like, Kat, your math is actually wrong on this, it is bonkers that I have to do this much math to read a report that is supposed to be public-facing and transparent. The International Game Developers Association Diversity Report does have information on non-binary folks. They also have a report focusing on LGBTQIA+ that I encourage you to read, again, outside the scope of this talk. But unfortunately, the most up-to-date version of this is from 2021. And when your imposter syndrome chimes in with a, well, maybe Black women aren't as qualified, shut up. Looking at it, women of color are by far the most educated in game development, yet we have the lowest percent of permanent positions. Additionally, despite dominating in postgraduate degrees, we hold the lowest percentage of managerial roles along with non-binary people of any race. Looking at these stats, that means my 7 years of advocacy has likely resulted in less than 1% change every year. We know we can't tolerate it. Can we prove it? Yes. Are you overreacting? Never. Okay. We've conclusively proved it's not fair. Now what? Is it worth it? What does 1% amount to? Well, on Dragon Age 4, because I was on the RPG team, early in the project, we started discussing player abilities. When race-based stats came up, I was able to point to Wizard of the Coast removal of race-based blocks and take it to the writing team. And we made it a thing that was environmental and learned instead of inherent to your race. My hair is in it. Number 88 in the character creator. This is a screenshot from one of the first Lunch and Learn talks I did through the women's group about it. My hair is a super common hairstyle for Black women, and it felt silly to me. It was never a choice. I always felt I could only represent myself by making a dark-skinned character with straight hair or a white woman with an afro. I actually worked at the company. If this wasn't the way to do it. There was going to be no way to do it. And I'm not a tech artist, but there were other people of color who were, and through tiny acts of solidarity and allyship, they made this a reality for me. This also extended to skin undertones. I often felt it was difficult to represent a biracial character in video games. You could probably even tell that the zoom camera was having a tough time picking up my skin tone properly. But using the melanin slider, I could finally make a character that looked like me. And for impact on our community, shout out to my manager, Daryl. He attended the very first game devs of color that I had really heard about, and he immediately signed me up for the one next year. Using my solidarity group, we were able to consistently send employees each year. And after that, Daryl worked with the Black Employee Resource Group, and I worked through the BioWare leadership to make EA a primary donor in 2023. Daryl's always been a real one. He's the first Black tech lead I ever had the delight of working under. He's one of the best programmers I know, and he gave me the best career advice I ever got. But it was because he could see things that other people couldn't, like needing to go the extra mile to make sure everyone knew what I was working on, what I did, and also remind them, hey, I did that. And we both cared about making the industry better. Through Edmonton Public Schools, we ran presentations for school kids aged 3 to 12, encouraging them to consider a job in video games. And after all of this, I can crash. This is so unfair. This is a lot of extra work, and I still have to do my job at the end of the day. And the toll is burnout. I couldn't perform my coding. I couldn't keep up with my hobbies. I couldn't care about anything. After shipping Dragon Age and surviving 2 rounds of layoffs, the spite that fueled my flame was snuffed out once I was transferred out of BioWare. And it's hard to even complain about because I was still lucky to have a job. But I felt like all the work I had done to build a better future for myself and the company was lost like that. And it's hard to talk about the L's while you're taking them. After the transfer in my new position, I encountered another familiar moment of dread. I wanted to cry. Progress is a constant battle, but it's devastating to feel back at square one. But I walked through my checklist, and I knew I couldn't be the only one. And I wasn't at square one, not really. I had friends now, so I messaged one and she told me she was already handling it. A woman I had onboarded 3 years ago, she was now the person speaking up. And she told me, for what it's worth, for all the messed up stories you have, I've never had anything close like that to happen to me because of the work that you did. And it's worth it. I'm standing up from the bench, screaming, put me back in, coach. The stuff you do matters. And it doesn't have to be you every time, but someone else sees things could be different or a little bit better, and maybe they feel like they're now able to ask for a little bit more. My contributions are 1% here on this chart, not in my life. So many of my favorite memories are in game dev. I remember early prototyping with box creatures as a co-op and meeting some of my best friends. I wouldn't have met Rachel or Daryl or anyone featured in my stories. I got to work in rooms with people who made the games I grew up on, and they know my name and they joke with me, and sometimes they even advocated for me. I fulfilled childhood dreams. I did a TTRPG with Austin Walker and both Commander Shepherds. I'm in the dev trailer for Dragon Age 4. I saw the development of this game from pre-production to ship, and I look crazy doing it. And I met devs like me. There are Black women here. This conference is filled with us. We touched some of your favorite things. I programmed skill trees. I made these level ups and XP and abilities and these item upgrades. A Black woman crunched to put these quality of life features in for you. That complete respect you can do to try out different builds, I programmed that. It can be a fun and fulfilling life, and sometimes I still can't believe that she is me. And I am her, and you are her, and we belong here. I'm telling you now, you belong here, and I want you here. You, nerdy little Black girl growing up somewhere small, you deserve this type of life too. Yes, you are a game dev. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege to talk to y'all today. Here are some of my data sources and quotes, places you can find me. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for that talk, Katrina. I know I personally struggle with anger, oftentimes whether or not it feels justified. But the data clearly shows, yeah, that anger in this industry, it's justified. And also the impacts of acting on that anger are tangible. They are real. They are worth it. When we build coalition, we build community, when we get that opportunity to speak to our experiences, things can get better. This industry has gotten better with the work of tons of individuals who have put that time and anger towards making progress. For as many ways as we continue to see people push back, we still push forward. So thank you for that talk, Katrina. I'm so glad you shared it. If you'd like to catch up with Katrina, you can find her on Blue Sky at ScaredyCat. That's SCARDEYKAT. Or you can look her up on LinkedIn at Katrina Barkwell. And that's going to do it for Game Devs of Color Expo 2025. Again, I want to say on behalf of the whole GDoc staff, thank you for being here. Thank you for spending time with these talks. It's always incredible to get to share these experiences. I'm looking forward to being able to do it again next year. A special thank you to my fantastic co-host, the Purple Sharpie, to all of the other GDoc staff who've been keeping this going, including our moderators in the chat. And of course, thank you for being here. And your host, head of curation, Josh Boykin. Have a fantastic evening. Looking forward to seeing you soon.